happen to be. Uh, this is the Groovy Podcast, episode 26. I'm Ken Cousin, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and
I'm Baruch, broadcasting from sunny California, Santa Clara. Hi, everybody.
well, good to see you, Baruch. How you been?
Good. How are you, Ken? It's been a while since we met at the last conference.
That's right.
And
so it's we'll be
I
together.
guess we will meet again. We will talk about conferences later.
Yes, right. But we will meet again at Great in EU. That'll be a lot of fun. So it's been 3 weeks, I believe, and we have a list of notes here. We should mention for our users, because or listeners, we keep forgetting to bring this up, that there is a show notes page that's always available. That one is on the GitHub repository, right?
Yes.
Okay, just giving you a chance to chime in. Any rate, it's on github.com/pledbrook, Peter Ledbrook's section /Groovy Podcast, and there's always a list of show notes at that location that has links to all the different things that we talk about every week. So this particular one is episode 26, and the first thing I mentioned on there, the first thing I added to the show notes, is that there's a new book in the Groovy ecosystem. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Do you know, Schalk? What would you suppose it is? Cronje?
Yeah, Crony sounds right to me.
Yeah, C-R-O-N and then J and then E with an accent, acute. I did manage to put in the accent on there. At any rate, he published his own LeanPub book called Idiomatic Gradle Plugins, and I looked over at the LeanPub section, and I keep meaning to purchase the book. I haven't done it quite yet, but I am planning to. He's got in there the you pay whatever you feel that you want to. You got a slider you can move up and down. But it says it's the subtitle is 25 recipes for plugin authors, and a couple people mentioned on Twitter that they have read it and they are very, very happy with the book. There is a free sample download available in case you're interested. I personally have spent a fair amount of time with Gradle lately because I'm trying desperately to finish up my book on the Gradle recipes for Android. So I've been working with Gradle a lot. I am really looking forward to reading this book. I hope to have read it before we speak again, or at least I'm certainly going to purchase it before we speak again.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like a good book.
Definitely. By the way, on the book side of it, I don't have it in the show notes because we've mentioned it a couple times before. The Java Testing with Spock book by Konstantin Kapolonis is available at Manning, and that's been there for a while, but I think the ebook variations just came out. He also put up a blog post, a long extended slide set on comparing Spock with JUnit, I believe. There's not a link.
That's right.
Yes, there is a link to that in the Grails diary, which we'll get to a little bit later. They've got a nice extensive comparison on that. It's actually the link is in the form of a PDF, which is already prepared. So if you need to make the business case or whatever about Spock versus JUnit, that's a nice resource for you.
Yeah, we need to put it in the show notes because it's very, very important. I've been with this argument number of times. Once in a while it comes up, and having something in the form of comparison is great.
Yeah, and making the argument that it's better in every way imaginable doesn't, unfortunately, often win the day. I've been playing with Spock fairly often. A lot of people are not aware of things that are considered a little bit beyond the basics. Some of those extensions are really nice. The ignore, of course, is in there. The ignore annotation is the same one from JUnit, but there's an ignore rest, which would mean only do this one and not do any of the others. And the one I like also is there's an ignore if, which allows you to put in a closure to say if this closure is false, then let's see, ignore if would mean if the closure is true, ignore it. Otherwise, don't ignore it.
Ignore it.
Double negative, right? Yes. There's also retain. There's several other extension ones that are all documented in the Spock framework documentation at docs.spockframework.org.
Yep. So I guess we will add the link both to the book and to this paper
Sure.
to the show notes. Right.
Yeah, we'll definitely add that. Now, did you notice anything about the Great Day in Warsaw? Did you were you involved in any of that, or know anybody who went?
Well, no, not so much. I wrote some impressions in Twitter. It looks like it was a great event. A lot of the speakers from the community, but that's more or less all I know about it.
I feel a bit of a connection to that. Not to that conference specifically, but a couple of years ago, I managed to. I wound up fortunate enough to give a Groovy class in Warsaw itself, which is my one visit there, and that was a lot of fun. They were very bright students, by the way. That was very good class that way. So I was really glad to see the conference get going. Again, in the Grails diary, they have links to several of the videos and some of the slide presentations as well from that. There were many interesting ones talking about Gradle under the hood, talking about, let's see, what else was in there. That the one from Charles Cronje about idiomatic Gradle, there, he gave a talk there about that. Creating and testing REST contracts. What else was in there? The sugar one, the SSHOOGR. Have you noticed that one? Have you noticed that at all?
Yes.
Yeah, that sugar plugin is a plugin for Gradle. That it's a Groovy DSL for doing remote shell connections.
Yes.
Did you do any? Have you played with that at all?
No, I just saw it exists, and I put it in my list of utilities which are nice to have one day, but I didn't try it yet.
Well, I did notice that it is part of SDK Manager now, SDK Man. So I was able to download it and install it, and I did read the documentation is amazingly thorough for something that new. That somebody really spent a lot of time working on this, and that plugin looks to be a very powerful way to do what they call infrastructure automation using a very nice Groovy DSL. So we have the link again is in the Grails diary, but we can add that as well in case anybody's interested. Of course, Andre Salmiray talked about Griffin. There's more discussions about Ratpack and things about working with Groovy and Android, which of course is always very interesting to me, especially. So anyway, that was some stuff about Great Days in Warsaw.
Right. And if we are talking about conferences, Greach concluded yesterday, I guess, right? Or a couple of days ago.
A couple of days ago. Greach was the April 8th and 9th, according to the schedule. There were a lot of attendees. I think I heard there were about 150 people there for the.
Yes, 150.
Right,
yes.
So that's the Groovy conference in Madrid every year. Everybody really likes it. It's a very popular one. And there were lots of talks there. You knew somebody there, though, definitely.
Right. So Noam, that of course was with JFrog for many years, and still a dear friend of ours, delivered Groovy Puzzlers with Andres at the conference. The new season 3. That was the premiere. First one of the new season, and I heard it was a great success, and people really loved it. So I think that's a good start for the whole new season of Groovy Puzzlers. There is a lot to come. The next show will be in Minsk in 10 days from now, and we will do the Groovy Puzzlers at Gr8Conf EU in Copenhagen as a closing keynote, and hopefully many more to come. Gr8Conf US, of course, Java 1 probably, etc., etc. So as usual, we will be all around with the new season, and the premiere was at Greach.
Now the Greach conference, so far that's it's going to take a few weeks or a month to get the videos and the slides online. There were a lot of tweets about the conference, and one of the links that was sent, I believe, was Guillaume Laforge's Groovy update, which actually gave the history of the language. It really went back and said, oh, in this version we added this, and in that version we added that, and talking about the transition to Apache Groovy and the new additions that are coming in the language with AST transforms. It was a very entertaining review from my point of view, to look back and see the history of the language as it evolved, and when Grails was created, and all these individual pieces. And one of the things that really jumped out at me is that when you look at the plan changes for Groovy, there's nothing in there that looks like it's going to radically change my life, which I view as a really good thing. I mean, it looks like the new plans illustrate that the language is pretty mature at this point, and that it's mostly additions to the language rather than major refactorings or changes in the libraries. And I think that's a good sign, frankly. There were several slides in there discussing the increase in the number of downloads, and that yes. led to a discussion also on Twitter about the TIOBE index, the TIOBE,
right,
which is always so highly suspect in terms of the value of that, right? It's a measure of programming language popularity based on several questionable metrics, I guess you'd say, in general. But what was significant is that Groovy has made a significant leap into the top 20 over the past few months. Yes. It was way down, yes. and now it's back into like 17, 18, 19. Those over the past 2 or 3 months, it's been holding steady in that range. And this tied into Guillaume's discussion about the downloads, saying that last year the downloads had been on the order of 4 to 5 million per month, and then they jumped to, after the move to Apache, they've jumped to about 12 to 13 million, and that he implied in the slides that the downloads this year have continued at that pace. I obviously haven't seen any more recent data yet, but that's what the slides had in it, and I think that's a very good sign.
And I think it makes sense because Apache is a very good reference for a lot of skeptical, I would say, managers that would hesitate to adopt Groovy otherwise. But project from Apache sounds like a very safe bet for a lot of people.
I think that's certainly part of it. I also get the sense that the rise of Gradle has led a lot of people to look at Groovy who might not otherwise have encountered it. So that's been very helpful. We're getting a few more books being published in the industry. That's good. Plus, Grails kind of had a bit of a interruption, I guess you'd say, when Grails 3 was released, and the whole transition away from Pivotal and into the OCI supporting, into the OCI company. But I think that's all basically washing out now, and now it's starting to grow again. What the message that seems to be having some difficulty making it into the mainstream is that you can use Spring Boot, and everything you learn about Spring Boot carries right over to Grails 3. And Grails 3 is therefore just adding in all the extra features onto Spring Boot that Grails brought all along, meaning the nice convention over configuration and the ease of adding new features and working with the various Groovy DSLs to make your life simpler. I think that once people realize that all this effort they're spending on Spring Boot will carry over directly into Grails 3, I think we're going to start seeing a rise there as well.
Right. Yes, I agree. Both of them look very good. And what I'm waiting for is for Greach to contribute more heavily into Groovy, not because they feel philanthropical to do so, but because I hope they will need additional features from Groovy, and they will just go ahead and add them. And the same with OCI, by the way, when they have very significant Grails team now that work on developing Grails, and when they will hit some limitations of the Groovy as a language, they will just go ahead and contribute, and we will see Groovy moving forward, driven by those usages in very successful tools and frameworks.
I think also one of the things that will really help Grails is when they finally publish a book on Grails 3. Because right now, all the existing Grails books are on 2.x and earlier, so that there's really nothing to point newcomers to the framework to other than the reference documentation and the Slack channel. And while those are very helpful and very useful, I know a lot of people, when they're learning, would much prefer to have a reference guide that they can hold. And I know that's in the works. I think that once that finally comes out, then we'll start to see a lot more adoption there as well. Now, of course, what did get a lot of attention in both of these conferences is Ratpack. I mean, that framework seems to be growing. So there were several talks, both at Gr8Day Warsaw as well as in Greach, on Ratpack for many interesting purposes. And of course, that leads us inexorably to the final version, apparently, of Learning Ratpack, Dan Wood's book. The book from Dan Bell.
I don't think it's real. I think it's fake. There is no way on this planet and in this universe that Dan would actually finish the book. Until I see a very hard proof, like you holding a hard copy in your hand, I don't buy it.
Well, I can't say anything because he did beat me to the punch. Looks like he's going to get his out before I finish mine, so I really can't criticize too heavily. But I did get the email from O'Reilly yesterday saying, oh, you can go download the latest version, and this is the final version before it goes to press or whatever. So I don't know.
No, I think it's all fake. I think it's phishing, and Dan Woods crafted this email, and no, I don't buy it.
I suppose that's possible. I don't think he's going to be at GreatConf in EU, but we will have to find out, when we get the chance to see it next, what the actual status is then.
Exactly.
So, at any rate, that also reminds us about Ratpack and the Learning Ratpack book. What would you like to discuss next? We have a few other elements in the show notes there.
The usual very useful mailing lists or digests are out. Groovy Calamari with a lot of first person evidence from Greach, right? And of course a lot of news, and the Grails diary from Greach as well. Both were published this week, so it's a very good read to get more Groovy news. And I would like to mention the recording of your webcast with O'Reilly. Seriously, use Groovy now. It is in the show notes, and it was actually superb. I watched it and I enjoyed it greatly.
You actually watched it? So
believe it or not.
Did you like the cat pictures?
Yes, of course. Course. No, that's as usual with you. What you can be sure of that it's a great show, and it's harder to do at webinar than on stage, but you manage anyhow.
Oh well, thank you. Talking about that Groovy Calamari, there were a couple articles in there that I'm definitely going to have to follow up on. There was a note about a Grails money plugin. So a plugin for Grails that allows you to use both big decimal for the amounts as well as a currency, although it doesn't say exactly how the currency is stored. I don't know whether it's an enum or just a string or what have you, but that they have a nice plugin that lets you use this throughout. I'm going to look into that. The other one that really jumped out at me is that Bert Beckwith apparently has made a Gorm util plugin, or a library at any rate, and he introduced that at Greach. And the neatest thing about it, from what the description says, is that when you turn on log SQL in a Grails app, you get the SQL, but it's all just the prepared statements with all the question marks thrown in there, but you don't actually get to see the values. Now, in Bert's book on programming Grails that he published a few years ago at O'Reilly, he talks about using various settings at trace level in order to see binding (1) to this, or binding (1) to that, or 2 to that. In other words, it's a very verbose way of seeing what values go in there. Apparently, he's created this Gorm util library that will allow you to actually see the values right in the prepared statement. And I'm sure that's going to be very, very useful for debugging and understanding what's going on under the hood. So they mentioned also something about a many-to-many trait, which is going to wind up in Spring Security Core, which makes sense. I mean, that's Bert maintains that plugin. So at any rate, that looked like there were a lot of neat additions to that plugin, and I do hope to check that out. So there was also one other thing that he mentioned, which I also found very interesting, is there was a set of slides and a talk about Jeb for browser automation.
Yep.
And there's been several talks about Jeb, and I liked a lot of them. But this one by Jacob, oh shoot, what's his full name? I only know his Twitter handle. Let me click on it here. Jacob Mickelson, right? Jacob A. Mickelson. He did a wonderful talk about Jeb, and it's very thorough. It went way beyond the stuff that I normally use and got into some real in-depth parts. So that's all part of the Groovy Calamari part. We'll mention it in our show notes, as you say, and maybe we'll add links or what have you, just as a way to discuss that. So there were a lot of cool things in there as well.
Yeah, that's a very good issue.
Now you
okay.
Sorry, you did a post about setting a private Maven repo on JFrog.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me. So it was a very nice post on Medium about how do you maintain your Grails 2 plugins, because now the official repository of Grails is Grails 3, but not everyone migrated. So you might want to keep your plugins around for Grails 2. And what can you do if those plugins aren't open source or aren't public? How do you maintain a private repository for Grails plugins? And of course, the solution is Bintray. And if you are in this position that you do need a good private repository for your plugins and you don't want to set up your own in-house servers, etc., you are more than welcome to use Bintray for that purpose.
Sounds good to me. I'll definitely take a look. I did a couple of quick blog posts just for anybody who might be interested. I did one on using Retrofit, the Retrofit library, which is very popular in the Android world for providing a client for RESTful web services. So I got to use that with Groovy. I didn't do it in an Android app. I did it just in a client-side regular old app. So that was fun. And also, of course, I just could not resist the urge to implement LeftPad as a service. Because Groovy.
Oh, that's actually, yes, that's a great blog post of yours, which brings the Groovy aspect into the whole unpublished gate npm gate, and there are tons of aspects of this scandal from the behavior of the encountered parties like Azure and Kik and npm registry, all the way to the quality of this library and those notorious 17 lines of code that all they do is left padding of a string, and in your blog you describe a one-liner that do the same in Groovy in much more elegant way, right?
Yeah, the Groovy JDK, the GDK as they call it, has added a pad left method to string, and you could just put in what character you want to pad with and how many characters you want, and you're done. So I took that and I implemented it, and then I turned it into a Ratpack app and deployed it to Heroku. So if any of them need to access LeftPad as a service, if you will, I've got a link in there and everything.
There you go.
Yeah, so there was mostly. I have noticed this about writing in general. Most people know, of course, writing is extremely difficult and extremely painful. But I have noticed about myself that if I have a gag to tell, if I have a joke, then I'll work really hard to tell the joke, even if I later take the joke out. So that got me motivated to go write this, and then I could always remove it, So just a writer's tip, if you will, that Groovy made easier. Anything else we want to talk about? Mention something about the upcoming conferences. I think you mentioned to me that the GrayConf EU agenda is now available.
Yes. So again, the links are in the show notes. The agenda of GrayConf EU is published, so you're more than welcome to see. And there's, as usual, great content there. You are a keynote speaker, which means great content, right? and yeah, it will be as usual an epic conference. On another news, Java 1 CFP is open for 2 days now, and there is a alternative languages track that I would love to see Groovy submissions there. Of course, alternative languages in Java 1 get relatively small chunks of slots, but we will do our best to accommodate as many Groovy talks as we can.
Let's hope that works out. There weren't a lot last year. Hopefully it'll increase this year. The
interesting reason why it wasn't a lot, because there was a lot of submissions for Groovy talks, so it got a little bit of pushback of all this Groovy again, and then it got cut.
We're definitely a gang, yeah, no question. The Groovy guys and not just the guys, but everybody. I don't want to say gal, that doesn't make sense. So just Groovy devs in general. I don't want to be patronizing, right? So hopefully we will get a reasonable set of submissions, and hopefully that Java 1, the organizers this time, will go ahead and decide to allow us to spread Groovy to a larger Java audience. The Gr8Conf EU conference is the first week in June. That's 1st through 3rd. I noticed that Gr8Day is going to be giving a Grails update as a keynote. I'm really looking forward to that. The Grails, the Gr8Conf Twitter has been very active, mentioning what the various talks are and meeting all the individual speakers. I think that's going to be fun. I noticed Ryan Vanderwerf is going to be talking about working with the Lego Mindstorms and working with the Alexi is the one from Amazon as well.
Yes. I believe the Lego Mindstorms was last year's gig, and this year he is with this Amazon virtual assistant, or virtual artificial intelligent assistant. And from what I heard, the things that he managed to do with Groovy with Alexi is mind blowing. It's like
I just can't imagine.
Almost looks like Skynet taking over, and always feels like Skynet will be eventually written in Groovy. This is what I think.
I'm going to just let that one ride. I just don't envy Ryan having to transport all that hardware, you know, every time he goes to give a talk about this stuff. I can't imagine having to transport all that. I suppose we should mention, just in passing, of course, that the Gr8Conf in the US is at the end of July, and then the G3 Summit, Groovy, Grails, Gradle, etc., is going to be in Fort Lauderdale the 28th of November to the 1st of December. So that ought to be really interesting. We'll talk much more about that once we get much closer to it, probably.
And
right
that's the official substitution of the 2JX part of Spring 1 2JX.
Yes,
that's
right.
The
Spring people went off their own direction, and I noticed when they did their call for papers, I know it doesn't matter to attendees, but I noticed they're not paying any travel costs at all, not even for speakers, so that I expect that the vast majority of people speaking at that conference will be Pivotal employees. But we'll see how that goes.
On the other side, we are talking about Las Vegas, right? There is a big temptation to come there. Yeah.
So that you can go and lose all your money, yes. We do need, as usual, to thank the No Fluff Just Stuff conference series for providing a link and some hosting and a homepage for the Groovy podcast. The No Fluff Just Stuff conference series is a series of weekend conferences in the U.S. that travels around the country, and they focus on everything in the Java ecosystem as well as agility, and there's been a lot of JavaScript-related talks lately, as well as a considerable number of software architecture talks as well. So we want to thank them very much for their help. Am I leaving anything out? Did that pretty much cover it?
Yeah, I think we're done for today and covered everything we had. So thank you very much, Ken. It was a great pleasure to do it again with you.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I guess we'll talk in 2 to 3 weeks.
And we'll see if we can get Peter available as well the next time we do this. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for participating, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.